there are matches that aren't about the standings, and not even really about a derby. They're about that one moment when you suddenly feel it. This is an era. The match against Zenit St. Petersburg, the team now coached by Vladimir Alekno, the coach Maxim Mikhaylov climbed his biggest peaks with, became Maxim's 700th match in a Zenit Kazan jersey. And Kazan won 3-0. Clean, confident. Like this night had a script and nothing was allowed to ruin it. Final whistle, and the evening stops being just a match. The guys lift Max up. His number 18 jersey goes up under the roof of the arena, and he's officially added to the club's Hall of Fame. And then the cherry on top. The same day it's announced. Mikhaylov extends his contract for one more season. He walks out, smiles, says Alga, and then stays a long time signing autographs. And that's where I want to start, not with a list of trophies, but with the question that honestly hooked me that night. How do you build a career where you reach 700 matches for one club, and you still don't look like someone who's about to stop? 700 matches for one club isn't just a long time. It's a whole life inside one system. The jersey changes, teammates change, generations change, roles change. But the expectations stay sky high. His first match for Kazan was on October 23, 2010. The Russian Super Cup against Belogori, a 3-0 win. Since then, 16 seasons with the club, and now a 17th is coming. And yeah, there's a real chance 700 matches for one club is basically a record for Russian volleyball. It's just that old match protocols aren't always easy to dig up to officially lock it in. And I kind of like that, because with players like this, the most important part of their greatness lives not in spreadsheets, but in people's memory. To understand Mikhaylov, you have to go back to where he even appeared on the map. Maxim Mikhaylov was born on March 19, 1988, in the settlement of Kuzmolovsky, Leningrad Oblast. He got into volleyball early, around 8 years old. Then came St. Petersburg and the Akron Olympic Reserve School. It looked like that's where the big career would be built. But at 15, there's a sharp turn. He moves to Yaroslavl. That's a huge detail, because most superstars follow the classic route: big city to top academy to top club. Mikhaylov's early path is Yaroslavl, Stroitel, Neftyanik, youth national teams, then the adult Super League. And it always feels like he's being built in real conditions, not a greenhouse. And another thing people forget, he didn't start as an opposite. He began as an outside hitter, and he was even called up to youth teams in that role. He becomes an opposite later in Yaroslavl, when coaches see it clearly. This guy can carry volume, score the ugly balls, live through tough situations, and take the go-to weight. While he's growing in Yaroslavl, the national team story runs in parallel. 2005, Russia wins the U19 World Championship gold. 2006, gold at the U20 European Championship. 2007, silver at the U21 World Championship, and Mikhaylov stands out individually. Best server and one of the top scorers. Most people mention that in one line. But those tournaments build a habit. Play on short rest, play under pressure, stay stable when you're tired, survive the schedule. And then the key part. The adult level starts noticing him more and more. Yaroslavl for Mikhaylov isn't just a line on a resume. It's where he gets fully assembled as a player. A real lab, where a promising outside turns into an opposite who can drag a team through games. In Yaroslavich, he stops being a talented kid. They start trusting him with the full workload. Bad sets, heavy balls, end-of-set situations, those moments when the team is looking at one guy like, just put it down. And he grows into that responsibility. Not instantly. Through matches, through mistakes, through long rallies. When everyone studies you, when they build the block around you, when the defense is set for you. And you still have to find a solution. That's where the switch to opposite becomes final, not because someone forced it, because it becomes obvious. He has a rare mix of contact height, patience, and a cold head. He becomes the team's top scorer, takes the bomber role, and at some point, opponents step on the court thinking one thing. The main job tonight is to stop Mikhaylov. There's one date Yaroslavl fans still remember like a password. February 27, 2010. match versus Fakel. 40 points. 40 in the Super League, not an exhibition, not against a youth team, a real league match where every point is a fight. At that time, it was a league record, and he was putting up numbers over a whole season that looked almost untouchable. And that's when it becomes clear why Kazan watched him so closely. Because those numbers aren't just a record, they're a message to every top club. Give this guy a system and real structure, and he can decide matches almost by himself. And basically it's in Yaroslavl where that Mikhaylov is born, the one Europe and the whole world are about to see a few months later, already in Zenit Kazan colors and in the Russia jersey. From there the story speeds up. That Yaroslavl season changes more than just how opponents treat him. It changes how the national team looks at him. Vladimir Alekno notices him, and the call-up isn't a maybe. It's the next logical step after the chaos he was creating in the Super League. Imagine it, you're 20. Around you are guys you were watching on TV not long ago, and you're not just on the roster, you actually play. Beijing 2008, his first huge senior tournament. Youngest on the team, but still one of the guys who steadily brings points. Russia takes bronze. And it matters not just because it's his first Olympic medal, it's because that's where he understands. He's already beyond the label talented guy from Yaroslavich. He's playing on a stage where the pressure is different, where every mistake is seen by everyone, where each rally feels like part of history. And even then, you can see the style that will follow him his whole career. No extra emotion, no loud gestures, just the next ball. Honestly, a cold-blooded volleyball finisher. After Beijing, it's obvious. If he handled the Olympics at 20, the next step is a big club where people don't wait for your potential to open up. They want trophies. And that's exactly what happens. Strong season in Yaroslavl. Those 40 points versus Fakel. 3 straight seasons as the league's top scorer. That insane 666 points in 25 matches. National team experience. So, in the summer of 2010, he joins Zenit Kazan, a club that had been chasing him for more than a year. Now it looks obvious. Back then it was a new test. Because in Kazan, nobody cares about your reputation. They care about one thing: can you deliver every week? And the mission wasn't easy. Replace Clayton Stanley. The first months aren't a fairy tale. It's adjustment, new training pace, deeper roster, different responsibility. But pretty quickly it's clear, Mikhaylov fits the system perfectly. Not the loudest guy in the locker room, not the most emotional on the court, but insanely reliable. And very soon you get that feeling he's not visiting. This is going to be a long partnership. His first match for Kazan, October 23rd, 2010, Russian Super Cup versus Belgary. Nobody is thinking about 700 yet, but that day starts the road that leads years later to that exact night in the volleyball center. And then things speed up even more, because now his name starts getting tied to the biggest wins. After the move to Kazan, it's like his career shifts into another gear. If before he was growing step by step, now the events come non-stop. 2011, Russia wins the World League. Mikhaylov is MVP. But the bigger part is this: he's no longer seen as young and strong. He's seen as a guy who can decide. And that's a different pressure. Nobody forgives you anymore. They just expect wins, every time. Then comes the World Cup, a tournament where you survive a long grind, fatigue, pressure, back-to-back matches. And in that period, he locks in as the main scoring force of the national team. And then London 2012. A tournament people still call one of the most dramatic chapters in Russian volleyball. Before the games, he has an ankle injury. Not the kind of thing that makes a headline, but serious enough that your body feels different on every jump. That whole Olympic cycle was full of guys pushing through stuff. You already know that. Nobody shows pain. Everyone fights for one goal. For many people, London is Muzersky switching to opposite and that legendary comeback from 0-2 in the final against Brazil. But what a lot of people forget is how good Mikhaylov was throughout that tournament, how he helped carry the team to that final. Because in the end, he becomes the top scorer of the entire Olympics. And if you watch his interviews from that time, he barely talks about personal numbers. He talks about the team, the atmosphere, how important it was not to break after the hard moments. That's Mikhaylov in one sentence. He's chasing team results, not personal trophies. The final versus Brazil is its own universe, a match even people who watch volleyball once every 4 years remember. And after London, there's this feeling. Mikhaylov isn't just part of the system anymore. He's one of the pillars. Not a guy who needs to scream or hype himself up, but in the key moments, he's always right there, reliable. And from there, the hardest part begins. Not winning one tournament, but staying at the top year after year. After London, it looks like the career is on rails. Kazan wins, the national team stays strong. Everything keeps moving upward. But then comes the part that's not as loud as an Olympic final. Ankles, surgeries, rehab that takes longer than you want. For an opposite, that's brutal. Jump is the position, and when the jump is limited, you have to rethink your game from scratch. And there's one episode people remember with a little smile. Mikhaylov shows up on court, as a libero, not as a gimmick, not as some experiment. Just because at that moment it was safer while he was coming back. An Olympic champion, the main scorer, and he calmly does what the team needs, so he can return without risk and without drama. And that's where you see it. His strength isn't only in vertical or power, it's in adapting. He doesn't try to prove everything is perfect. He rebuilds, moves a bit more economically, chooses shots a bit smarter, and slowly gets back to that level everyone calls normal for him. The stretch doesn't make highlight reels. It's not flashy, but without it, you don't understand how he reaches 700 matches and still stays a player coach's trust. Because this is where he learns the hardest skill, playing for a long time. After that rough injury period, his career enters a new phase. He's not the young opposite who just flies over the block and wins with pure athleticism. Now it's a more mature game. He's not only using strengths, he's hunting weaknesses. Kazan keeps winning in those years. Russian titles, Champions League, international trophies. But his role shifts. Sometimes he's the first option. Sometimes he's the guy you go to for the key points. Sometimes he gets managed, so he has fuel for the long run. And that's hard for any athlete, because you have to accept you're not the same as at 20. But that doesn't mean you're less important. With the national team, Rio then Tokyo, where they take silver. By then, Mikhaylov isn't just a scorer. He's a legend who's basically collected the whole Olympic set, and he still isn't thinking about stopping. And even though in Tokyo he makes the mistake in the last rally of that final, nobody's going to point fingers at him. People were more shocked by one thing, how timeless he still looked. Because holding elite level for a decade is harder than having one great season. In recent years, he keeps getting asked the same question. Why not Europe? Why not change the league? Try something new at the end? And his answer is always calm. No slogans, no big storyline. He says it simply. Kazan is already home for me, so I didn't really consider other offers. And it doesn't sound like a nice quote. It sounds like the summary of 16 seasons where he lived his whole career with the club. For him, it matters that the team keeps growing, that there are new goals, that even at 37 you can still evolve and find new roles. And honestly, that choice shows who he became. A lot of guys at the end chase a new challenge by changing clubs. Or they just ride it out for money. Mikhaylov finds the challenge by changing himself inside one system. He stays in Kazan not because it's comfortable, but because he knows his experience is truly needed. And you can hear it when he talks about the future roster. The team gets younger, new guys come in, and for the first time he becomes the oldest player on the team. Before he was kind of in the middle, learning from older guys and playing next to equals. Now he's the uncle, the veteran, the balance point. And he talks about it without nostalgia, with interest, because for him it's not the end. It's just a new role inside the game he loves. And then there's the topic he talks about surprisingly calmly. Life after playing. Not many athletes can give a clear answer. Most don't even want to think about it. When he's asked, he doesn't talk about big projects or coaching a top pro team. He actually admits he doesn't see himself as a head coach of a professional team right now. But one idea keeps coming up: youth volleyball. He says the foundation is where things fall behind. If you want strong athletes in the country, you have to build the base in childhood. And it's not just words. Every year he goes back to his hometown, Kuzmolovsky, and runs a kids tournament. He just comes, talks to the kids, does masterclasses, shows what pro warm-ups and training really look like. He says sharing experience matters. And that's why it doesn't sound like a plan. It sounds like something he's already doing. Sometimes it honestly feels like Mikhaylov isn't even real. He's so perfect when we talk about volleyball. Insane discipline, the willingness to sacrifice for the bigger goal. And there's one more detail that explains a lot. His son plays volleyball, just the starting level, normal practices. And Maxim tells him one simple thing. Decide for yourself. If you want to follow my path, I'll support you. If you choose something else, I'll support that too. No pressure, no expectations. And in that moment, the guy we usually see through trophies and stats becomes much easier to understand, because behind every win is a person who can look at the game calmly and think about what comes after the applause fades. And that brings us back to Kazan, to the night when 700 was finally said out loud. Mikhaylov later says it's just a regular season match, it's too early for big conclusions. That's him. He always lowers the temperature and refuses to inflate the moment. But from the outside, there were too many symbols for it to feel normal. His 700th time stepping on the court for the club. The opponent, Alekno's team, the coach tied to a huge part of his career, a full arena, and a clean 3-0. After the match, teammates lift him up. The number 18 jersey goes under the roof and he walks to the mic and says simple words of thanks. No long speeches, no farewell tour vibe. And maybe that's why it feels real. Because Mikhaylov never played for pretty stories. He just played for a long time, steadily, honestly, for himself and for the people who supported him. There's another detail that makes the night even more personal. The anniversary jersey is presented to him by two coaches, Vladimir Alekno and Alexei Verbov. With one, he grew into who he became. With the other, he's still playing in this new stage of his career, and nobody knows when it ends. And you realize 700 matches isn't about the number, it's about the people you've spent half your life with inside this sport. His family comes out, wife, son, applause, camera flashes, and that feeling like time slows down for a second. And then he says it's short. We keep going. Only Alga. And that line hits harder than any big speech. During the ceremony, another piece of news is announced. He's extended for one more season. For some people, that's just paperwork. But if you really think about it, that's the main message of the night. He's not finishing. He's staying, and he admits next season he'll be the oldest guy on the team for the first time. Not just a leader by experience, but that veteran who helps young guys find their way in big-time volleyball. Before, he learned from older players. Now it's his turn to give. And it doesn't feel like the end of a career, it feels like a new chapter. And considering that for the first time in many years Kazan will be without foreign players, the season honestly looks insanely interesting. When people hear 700 matches, they usually think trophies. But behind that number are thousands of normal practices, recovery days, decisions nobody sees, emotional calm, knowing when to switch on, being ready to play a different role when the team needs it. He was never the loudest guy, he was one of the hardest workers, and those guys usually last the longest. At some point, you think the story should end right there. The jersey under the roof, applause, a perfect symbol. But Mikhaylov walks out to the fans and signs autographs for another full hour. No rush, no goodbye feeling. And that's probably the main point of the whole story. 700 matches isn't a period, it's just a moment where you can look back and calmly keep moving forward. Today was the story of Maxim Mikhaylov. From his first practices in Kuzmolovsky to the night in Kazan when his jersey went up under the roof after his 700th match for the club. And it really feels like this story isn't finished yet.